for the second keynote session for today, we have Polly. Now, Polly is a trailblazer in solving dilemma of work from anywhere, creating equality between those in the room and those who aren't. Whether in an office setting or your home office, Polly has got your back. So for the second keynote, please welcome Brian Phillips, and he is going to share his experience on using personas to drive equality of experience in remote working. Now, Brian is a collaboration expert, a former industry analyst, and the current director of product marketing at Poly. So let's quickly welcome Brian. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you for having me. Go ahead and start my content.
Hi, Brian. Thank you so much for joining us today. So glad to have you here.
Hello, thank you very much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Amazing.
All right.
Over to you, Brian. Thank you so much.
Sure. So I'm here today to talk about using personas to drive a quality of experience in remote working. So I know that's a lot to unpack there. Essentially, as we've moved towards this trend of remote working, something that was already happening prior to COVID and certainly has been accelerated now, how do we make sure that everybody feels like they are an equal participant in the meeting experience? That's what we're going to use personas to help us define, because I think it's a more daunting task than it might appear initially. So let me go ahead and dive right in. First, a little bit on who is Poly, in case you're not familiar with us. So the Poly was formed by the combination of Plantronics and Polycom. So you may not be familiar with the Poly name yet, but hopefully you've heard of Plantronics and or Polycom before. So Plantronics has been the global leader in headsets for decades, going back to the moon landing in the 1960s. Polycom, we're best known for our triangle-shaped conference phones, really reinvented the audio conferencing industry back in the early 90s, and then introduced video conferencing as well as IP phones. So by combining these two organizations back in 2018, we really created a kind of perfectly harmonized set of collaboration devices for any type of meeting from any type of workspace. And then in 2019, we rebranded the new combined company as Poly. So that's a little bit about who we are. And I think in having that really broad set of collaboration devices to serve any type of call from any type of workspace, it puts us in a unique position, I think, to really understand what users need when it comes to collaboration devices. Because we all know work is really no longer a place. I guess today, more so than ever, right? With a lot of us still being at home, not going into the office, work has really transformed from being a place that you go to really being about what you do, right? So it's critically important to match individuals up with the right technology to make this all work so that our work can get done from anywhere smoothly and without interruption, and with everybody feeling like they're an equal participant in the experience. So one of the things that we've been doing for about the last decade or so to help to drive what's the right solution for the right type of worker is a pretty extensive set of persona research. So we just actually updated this with our new 2021 update. So this is based on a survey we did this last fall, in the fall of 2020. And this was a global survey of about 5,000 knowledge workers globally. So we're just talking to people who are working at organizations of 250 employees and up, really kind of knowledge workers, office worker type of individuals between 18 and 65 and countries around the globe. So we selected about 8 countries in every region throughout the world. Again, 5,000 respondents. So a pretty sizable survey so that we could get a handle on the trends that are happening around collaboration and what's happening with these personas. And again, we've been doing this research for over 10 years now. So we go in and we do a pretty significant update about every 3 years or so. So one of the great things is now we can start to see trends in how things are changing. So it's not just looking at a point in time, but by looking at those trends, we can know not only how things have changed, but how might they continue to change as we move forward. So some of the higher level statistics and interesting information we found in this latest version. So certainly we've seen a dramatic shift to more remote working, right? So back when we last did a significant update to this research back in 2017, we found that about 46% of knowledge workers were regularly working from more than one location. So that could mean they're mostly in the office and they're working a day a week at home, or maybe an evening a week at home, or sometimes on the road. But this took about 46% of individuals were working from more than one location. So you go up to early 2020, just prior to COVID, because the way that we were structuring this survey, even though we were asking people in this last fall of 2020, but we would ask them, what were your working habits? How were you working just prior to COVID? So early 2020, we were already up to then about 60% of people were working from more than one location regularly. On a more granular level, we saw that the biggest hit or drop took place in the office, right? About an 8% drop in the amount of time people were spending in the office, which of course was then going to more working from home, more working from what we call a third space. So you could think of a WeWork or a cafe, or maybe you're on the road, right? And of course, this makes sense, right? Many surveys, including those from Gartner, show that when organizations give their employees more flexibility to work from wherever they are most productive, right, it shows a substantial increase in the effectiveness of high performers versus forcing people to be in the office from 9 to 5 every day, right? So this makes a lot of sense. It mirrors trends we've already been seeing. In terms of the types of meetings that people are having. So we also saw the percentage of in-person meetings decrease about 11% from 2017 to just prior to COVID in early 2020. So again, that mirrors that data we saw where people are just in the office less. So they're having fewer in-person meetings where you're just meeting with colleagues who are physically located with you, right? Voice calls have stayed about flat. Really, you can do voice calls from anywhere. We've all got mobile phones, or we've got phones in the office, and that didn't really change. But video had already been changing pretty substantially. So as a preference, as a preferred way of having a meeting, it had already grown from 26% of individuals had video as their preference in 2017, had already grown to 44% by early 2020. So I think what some of these data points show is something that kind of disproves a bit of a misnomer that's out there about the way things have changed with COVID, because I think there's a bit of a perception that work had been the same for decades and we were all just going into offices, and then all of a sudden we have a pandemic and everybody has to be at home, and that rapidly changed everything. I don't think that's true. These changes are things we've seen for a long time. Again, the increase in remote working just from 2017 to early 2020, the increase in preference for video calls in that short period of time. These are trends that were already happening. They got accelerated by COVID, no doubt. But the fact that these were changes that were already taking place, I believe has significant implications for what the future looks like. Because if all of this increased use of video, increased amount of remote working, if it was all just due to COVID, you could make an argument that when the pandemic ends, everything just goes back to the way it was before. But it's not going to, right? This is a trend that was already happening. It got accelerated by COVID, and there's going to be a new permanent state or a new permanent change going forward. I think it's something that's important to keep us in mind as we're planning for the future and planning on what the workplace of the future really looks like. Okay. Now, in terms of the devices people are using, so we saw a growth between 2017 and early 2020 in the usage of office-based video conferencing systems and conference phones. So you think of these as the devices when you go in a conference room, right? The conference phone on the table, the video conferencing system in the big conference room. Now you might say, well, wait a minute. We talked about there's fewer in-person meetings, fewer people in the office. Why is there's such growth in group collaboration systems? Though if you think about it, I think it kind of makes sense. If you're in the office and you're just having an in-person meeting, well, you don't need to use a conference phone or a video conferencing system, right? The more you have individuals who are not in the office who need to connect, the heavier usage you're going to get of the tools that are in the office by the people who are in the office, right? So I think those data points actually correlate very, very well. Headset use has exploded over the last 3 years. Again, even pre-COVID, between 2017 and early 2020, jumping from 35 to 64% of knowledge workers saying they're using a headset, and then even greater for video. So we went from 29% knowledge workers using video 2017 up to 71% just prior to COVID. So again, trends that were already happening, right? Zoom had a market cap of $25 billion long prior to COVID, right? This is already a huge trend that was taking place that's now been accelerated. Okay. So certainly, right, as we've gone into COVID, these numbers have gone even further. So we asked people, all right, so what changed between early 2020 and say mid to late 2020 when we were doing the survey? And right, we continue to see huge increases in voice conference calls with multiple people or in video calls. So we all know everybody's at home and everybody's on video or everybody's on conference calls, right? So those trends kept going up, but then I know the key question ends up becoming, but what does the future look like, right? What does the new normal state become as we start to work past this? And this survey was not designed to try to prognosticate that necessarily, but we did ask people, okay, so as an individual, what do you think is going to change for you, right? What's going to be different between pre-pandemic, during pandemic, and post-pandemic on an individual basis? So I think that gives us some indications, at least of what users want or what individuals desire. So I talked a few slides ago about the percentage of people working from more than one location. Went from 46 to 60% between 2017 and early 2020, leveled off and dropped a bit during the pandemic because, well, a lot of us are at only one place, which is home, right? But the expectation of going forward, how many of you are going to be working remote, at least part of the time, goes up to 73%. So again, something that was already happening, leveled off, and now it's really going to accelerate even further as we get into the future, at least from the standpoint of the expectations of users, right? More people are expecting to spend less time in the office than before. Work from home is really here to stay, right? Much higher expectations going forward of the amount of time people will spend working from home, either full-time or in kind of that hybrid mode where you're at home part of the time and then you're in the office part of the time. Growth in teleworking continuing to grow. So again, places like WeWork or other co-working type of spaces, people expect to utilize those more. Another data point on here that I found really interesting as we were looking at this is expectations around business travel. So as we asked people, how much time did you spend on the road prior to COVID? How much do you expect to spend after COVID? So about 27% of people were traveling regularly, of these knowledge workers, prior to the pandemic. Same exact percent expect to be traveling regularly after, so 27%. Then when you look at the aggregate, right, surveyed 5,000 people globally, and in total, about 6% of total working time we found was spent while people were on the road. Obviously, that's heavily weighted towards your road warriors and people who are there all the time. And you got a large swath of people who don't travel much at all, right? But in aggregate, it was about 6% of working hours spent on the road. Expectations post-pandemic, about 6%. I don't know. I find that interesting. What this tells me is people have an expectation that their travel, their business travel post-pandemic is going to go back to the way it was before. Now, again, this is a survey that's on an individual basis. I suspect a lot of their organizations may have a different feeling about this. I don't know. Now we're getting into just my speculation, but I believe a lot of organizations permanently going forward are going to have a bit more scrutiny on business travel than they did previously. And will say, well, for some of those trips we used to take, wow, we've proven that we can do them effective without getting on an airplane. I believe there's going to be more scrutiny going forward, and that travel from a work standpoint is not necessarily going to bounce back as quickly as individuals believe it is, but because it remains to be seen, right? Just how this falls out in the future. So with all of that, right? Understanding that we're going to have this new permanent change in remote working moving forward, then the question becomes, how do you outfit people with the right technology to make that work? Because it's not a one size fits all, right? You can't just send out a headset and a webcam to everybody and say, here you go, you got your remote working kit, everybody's in a good place. Because we're all individuals, right? And we've all got different working styles, different types of work that we're doing. And so we need to take multiple factors into account when defining, well, what's the right set of technology that's going to work for each individual to make sure that they're an active participant in the conversation and not being left out, right? And there's multiple facets we need to look at around what types of meetings or interactions are we having? What types of spaces are we doing it in, right? Are we at home? Are we in the office? Are we at some sort of third place or on the road? What type of access do we have from those places, right? And then what types of devices are we using to be able to connect in? So a lot of different factors that come into play. So let's just take maybe one individual person and look at a, maybe typical day in the life post-pandemic when we get into the future, right? Of how somebody might be working. So maybe she's getting up early because she's got an early morning conference call that she's jumping on with multiple people from home. She's going to just be on her home Wi-Fi. It's a video call, but she's got kids doing remote schooling. And so she's just going to get on her headset and her webcam and get on that meeting from home. But she's also got an important meeting happening in the office later that day that she wants to be there in person for. So the same individual then goes to the train station, but they've got a call they've got to get on while they're in transit. So she gets on the train. She gets on just a one-to-one call over her mobile phone, just using her wireless headset, right? Then she winds up in the office. Meeting starting, she jumps in a conference room, is now on the corporate network using a room video conferencing system, right? So just in the span of a few hours, using lots of different types of technology to be able to make her day work, right? And of course, you start to multiply that among not just this one person with all these different types of working from different types of spaces, whether at home or back in the office or on the road. You then start to multiply that among all the different individuals that she's speaking with and all of their unique needs. And it can get really daunting to try to figure out, all right, for each person, how do we make sure we outfit them with the right technology that's going to work for them? It can get a little bit overwhelming. So that's why we started doing this persona research in the first place, because all of us are individuals with our own unique needs, but for the most part, we can be lumped into some larger synthesized buckets, right? To help to define, well, what type of worker are you? What more aggregated set can you fall in that will help as, say, an IT manager trying to deploy technology to thousands or tens or hundreds of thousands of employees, help me get closer to the right technology that's going to work for you, so it's not such this overwhelming thing, right? So that's where this persona research becomes very important. Now, the personas we're looking at are individual user personas, right? So that's where we have now reams of data behind all these different knowledge workers and can start to categorize them into these different buckets for different types of workers so that we can get closer to being able to personalize an experience for them and get technology in their hands that's going to really work for them and work for the type of work that they're doing, right? All right. So let's take a look at some examples of some of these different types of personas that we've identified. So there are 6 primary ones that kind of came out through our research that we're orienting around for figuring out how to match the right person with the right kind of collaboration devices. So there are 2 primary personas that are mostly office-based. Now, again, office-based during normal times, right? Obviously, right now, for a lot of us, everybody's at home, but let's look towards the future. And this data really was based on just prior to the pandemic, right? So we believe these same personas and work styles are going to persist. Some of the numbers may change, some of the percentages may change, but ultimately, these haven't changed. The overall buckets haven't changed substantially in the years we've been doing the research. What has changed is some of the nuances within each of these. So 2 of these are primarily office-based. One is called the office communicator. So this is someone who is mostly desk-based, goes to some meetings, but not necessarily a ton, is typically not the leader in those meetings. So they're a participant. Sometimes they're taking notes or sometimes they're taking action items for themselves or others, but typically somebody who is an observer more than an active participant during meetings, typically desk-based, typically not someone who's super tech savvy, right? So this isn't somebody who necessarily wants to be on video. The lowest video usage, right, of these 6 categories is for this office communicator persona. But again, going forward, I think expectations are going to be, well, maybe you didn't do much video before, but now everybody's been doing video from home and we're going to need to going forward. So this office communicator, right, that's one distinct set. We found that was about 13% overall of our knowledge workers we were looking at. But then we also have the office collaborator. So this is also somebody who's primarily office-based, but more tech savvy, more of a leader in meetings, bouncing around between conference rooms, their own desk if it's a fully remote meeting. So somebody who's going to be a bit more dynamic as far as how they're moving around the office and has, I don't know, a stronger set of communication needs to make sure that they can get their meetings done and make sure that their collaboration can happen effectively. So the office collaborator is a much more substantial portion. This is the biggest of all the personas that we found. At 27% of all knowledge workers, we would put in kind of that office collaborator bucket. Okay. Now the next three are more flexible personas. So one is the remote collaborator. So I think you can think of the office collaborator, but instead of somebody who's primarily in the office, now we've got somebody who's primarily at home. So a home-based person. But again, similar types of work styles and trends around somebody who's more of a leader and a participant in meetings, somebody who's a bit more tech savvy, very high headset usage, our second highest for this particular category, high video usage. So this is someone who maybe in contrast a little bit to the office collaborator, because they're full-time at home, feels a stronger need to stay connected, right? They're not getting the in-person interaction. They're not getting the face-to-face time with people in the office that the office collaborator is. So for the remote collaborator, having the right tools and technology to stay connected becomes an imperative just to get their job done, for their careers, right? So definitely a different set of needs when it's somebody who's primarily home-based, long-term, versus somebody who's primarily office-based, right? Now, then we have the flexible worker, and you can almost think of this as a hybrid between the two. It's somebody who is working a lot at home and in the office. You know, when we talk about the future being made up in many cases largely of, hybrid workers and hybrid working styles, I think this is the kind of person we're talking about. Maybe at home a couple days a week, in the office a couple days a week, sometimes at a co-working space, occasionally on the road. So they're kind of all over the place, which again creates a different set of needs for the kind of technology that is going to help you be productive no matter where you are. So we showed this, again, just prior to COVID, numbers of being about 20% of the total population of knowledge workers. It wouldn't surprise me at all if the next time we update this persona research, this is actually the biggest category, because I think coming out of the pandemic, this is where a lot of us are going to wind up. Wouldn't surprise me if that office collaborator number actually drops, because the office collaborators maybe become the flexible workers of the future. So again, I'm speculating there, but I suspect that may be where we wind up. The road warrior, right? The person who's on the road the bulk of the time, they're probably out of the office more than they're in it. So they, of course, have their own unique set of needs because they're constantly on the road, very mobile first. They're fully dependent on their mobile phone. Interesting. A quite low percentage on the lower end of video usage, but I guess it makes sense when you think they're often in places they are comfortable being on a video call. If they're in an airport or they're in a hotel room, or right, they're all over the place. And so oftentimes are going to be much more heavily on a voice call than appearing on video. And then our final category we've got here is what we call the connected executive. So this is someone who tends to be very tech savvy. They are demanding, right? So if things aren't working for them, you're going to hear about it. They are leaders in meetings. They're by far the heaviest percentage of video usage, again, even prior to COVID, as well as headset usage. So they've got a lot of devices. They probably have multiple sets of devices for different places they're working. Oftentimes, they're going to be working at home and in the office, plus on the road. So these are the people who are probably going to scream loudest if they don't have the technology that they need to make sure that their collaboration is effective. So they're going to be the noisiest probably of this group if their needs aren't being satisfied, right? In this connected executive category. So all of these in aggregate make up about 92% of the total workers you're going to find in an enterprise. There actually is a seventh persona I didn't list. It's called the office independent. The reason we're not focusing on them is for the most part, they're not collaborators. They are kind of heads down at their desk, usually in the office, focused on what they're working on, not many meetings, not many video calls. So not really a huge need for collaboration technology. So not that we're ignoring them, but for the purposes of this persona research, it's not one that we're focused on as much as these more collaborative personas that we're looking at here, which make up the vast majority of the workforce anyway, right? All right, so with those different work styles identified as our key personas, then it becomes, how do we drive this equality of experience? Because as I said earlier, you can't just toss a webcam and a headset at everyone and say, well, here you go, you got your remote working kit, right? Everybody go collaborate. We have all these different types of personas with, in some cases, distinctly different needs. And of course, we know even within those, we're going to have individuals are going to have their own unique needs. And so driving that equality of experience becomes really important. Equality of experience doesn't mean everybody gets the same stuff. It means that everybody's got an experience or technology that's tailored to their unique requirements, whether they're at home, they're in the office, they're bouncing back and forth between them, or they're on the road. Everybody has the devices they need to make sure that they are an equal participant in their meetings, that nobody's voice is being left out, that nobody is kind of being left out of a conversation because they don't have the right gear to be an active participant, right? The question is, how do we make sure that we're matching the right technology to those different personas so that we can make sure everybody's got that equality of experience and has that equal participation in their meetings, right? So that's what the persona research can really help us drive. And, right, I put up that high level information on the previous slide, but we've got reams of information on each one of those personas and their different work styles and work habits and the types of work that they're doing. Plus, again, since we've been doing this for a decade now, we've got these trends of how it's changed over time. So we can really start to match up what's the right technology fit for each persona so that we can make sure that everybody's got that equality of experience. So let me give you some examples. Let's take your typical just private home office. It's what I'm in right now, right? Doors closed and I'm just in my own space here at home. So let's take the flexible worker in a private home office environment. For this type of individual, that's where having something like what we call our new Studio P5 webcam plus a Sync 20 Bluetooth speakerphone can be a really good fit for that flexible worker. Because again, the flexible worker is someone who tends to move around. They're home a couple days a week. They're going to go back in the office a couple days a week. They're moving around a lot. So having technology that's small and easy to carry is going to be important because for a lot of these folks, they're not going to have a set of technology at home and a different set of technology back in the office. They're going to need one set of gear they can take with them wherever that's always going to work well. So when you've got a Sync 20 along with a Poly Studio P5 webcam, right, you've got something that's small and easy to take with you, gives you great voice and video quality. But the other key too for that flexible worker, because they're moving around a lot, is that you can actually connect the wireless Bluetooth adapter for the Sync 20 speakerphone right into the back of the Studio P5 webcam. Well, that's great for the flexible worker because they're moving between home and the office a lot. This makes sure that the wireless adapter is always with them and they're always ready for a call, whether they're at home, whether they're in the office or somewhere in between, right? So all that technology can easily go with them back and forth, right? Now let's take the same private home office environment, but instead look at the remote collaborator. So again, this is the person who is home-based. They are like full-time work from home. Again, for the full-time work at home participant, they've got a high level of anxiety over making sure that they're clearly seen and clearly heard, and all of the interruptions that can become a problem when you're working remote or working at home don't become an issue on your calls. So that's where, for this persona, I'd recommend something like our Poly Studio P15. This is also another pretty new device. It's actually what I'm on right now. It's what I'm using here for this presentation. So this is going to up-level their experience to 4K resolution. It's going to add automatic camera tracking. So it's always going to put you at the center of the view, even if you're moving around some or you've got a standing desk. It also has unique technology built in to block distracting noises. So this is a real problem for the remote collaborator, right? You've got kids doing remote schooling and you've got the dog barking next door or airplanes flying overhead. With the Studio P15, it's got technologies called Noise Block AI and Acoustic Fence that are going to automatically keep distractions out of the meeting. So as the remote collaborator who is concerned that I am looking professional and looking and sound my best during video calls, something like a Studio P15 is going to be a better fit because I don't need portability. I don't need something I can carry back and forth between home and the office. What I need is an experience that makes me feel confident that I am being clearly seen and heard on my video calls. So again, for this persona, that's probably a better technology fit. Now, again, same home office environment, but now we go to the connected executive. So this is the one I mentioned earlier. They tend to be tech savvy. They tend to be demanding. They're on a lot of calls, probably highly paid. They're working on important deals and need kind of the top of the line experience. So that's where we can move them up to this Poly Studio P21. Takes all this great technology, a lot of the same technology, frankly, that the remote worker, the flexible worker are using, but now builds it into one device that comes with the display integrated, all of the audio and video, plus even things like ambient lighting built-in calling controls. So a more advanced device for the more demanding connected executive in one sleek package that gives them everything that they need. They can just plug it into their PC or Mac, fire up any type of call, and away they go. So again, from a persona matching standpoint, this is probably a better fit for their private home office. And I don't know, I think it's very likely that for this connected executive who might also be kind of a flexible worker, right? Because they're at home sometimes, they're going to go back in the office sometimes, they're probably going to have multiple sets of technology. So they may have a Studio P21 at home and the same exact system back in the office. So no matter where they're working, they just plug in their laptop and it works the exact same way. And then maybe they also have a Studio P5 kit with a Sync 20 or one of our Bluetooth headsets for when they go on the road, right? So this is someone who, more so than these other personas, is likely to have multiple sets of technology to meet different needs as they're at different types of workplaces, right? So just as some examples of taking the same exact workspace, but you put a different persona in there, and again, it's going to drive a different technology need. Same thing happens when we do go back to the office. I know the main topic here is about remote working, but we are going to start going back to the office one of these days again, I promise. Actually, in a lot of countries, they already are. Again, this was a global survey that we did. And I know, most of us based here, I'm in the US, and most of you are going to be in Canada. Just as a side note, whenever I talk to my colleagues in Beijing and I see them on video and I see them sitting in their cubicles and there's all sorts of people around them, I think, wow, it looks like 2019. That looks so nice, right? So definitely we're at different places in different parts of the world. But even in the US and Canada, we are going to go back to the office here. And the same thing applies, right? When you think of an open office space for the office communicator, again, this is someone who may be what you think of as a video reluctant from before, but now, right, we're on more Zoom calls, we're on Teams calls. It's just going to be the expectation going forward. So getting someone like that, a Studio P5, along with one of our wired headsets, like a Blackwire 8225, that can then also connect in with their desk phone, maybe one of our CCX 500s, can make a good kit for that office communicator. They're not someone who's getting up and taking calls from lots of different spaces around the office, right? Whereas in contrast, same workspace, but now they got the office collaborator. This is the person who's more the call leader, and they're going to conference rooms and they're doing some calls from their desk, and they're kind of mobile throughout the office in a sense. We're right, same camera, same phone, but now you move them maybe up to one of our Savvy headsets, which are DECT-based. So they've got great wireless coverage throughout the office. They need to pop into a huddle room for something. They can kind of almost wear it all day and know they can take a call from anywhere within their office environment, jump into a conference room, go back to their desk, and always have technology that can be with them for whatever type of collaboration they happen to be doing at that point in time. So that's maybe more a better persona fit for that type of individual. Or certainly if we think of our road warrior, right? At some point, yes, we will be traveling for work again, and the road warriors will get back on the road. So again, for them, maybe something like our Studio P5 camera, because it's nice and small, they can easily toss it in their bag for those times they are kind of settled in somewhere and they can jump on an audio call. But again, these folks are mobile first. A lot of times they're at an airport or they're somewhere where they're just on an audio call. So matching them up with like our Bluetooth Voyager 6200 UC headset, right? Super easy, just toss on, earbud style, and then this compared to your mobile phone at the same time that it pairs to a wireless adapter that goes right inside your camera for when you plug it into your laptop. So multiple types of calls, can always wear it all day long. battery life, right? So for a road warrior, something like that is probably ultimately a better fit. So, and again, I know everybody's going to be an individual. They're going to have their own nuances between what they need. But we have found as we work with customers that instead of starting with, oh, I've got 10,000 employees to outfit with remote working gear, how do I even start? This gives you a really solid place to start, right? So I'd say as you're working with your customers and helping them plan their remote working strategies going forward, by leveraging this persona research, it gives them a great roadmap and a starting point for what types of technology are going to work best in their environments. And then, of course, they can always look at their own environment, because this is aggregated data. Every organization is going to be different. And some are going to say, oh, I have a much higher percentage of road warriors, or I've got a much higher percentage of remote workers, right? You can start to customize these things for each individual organization based on their other priorities and their other strategies around how they want to enable collaboration, okay? So ultimately, I do believe Poly is the best partner for you, as well as for our joint customers, to deliver these kind of solutions, because we're really the only full solution provider that works across any ecosystem, any type of device, whether it's personal or in a meeting room, with end-to-end management for all of this. So IT can manage it through one cloud-based service to global service and support. Right? I think we're very, very uniquely positioned to help our joint customers succeed as they're figuring out not only how do I deal with what's going on today, but how do I plan for the future and make sure we've got a scalable and effective remote working environment for years and years to come. So with that, I thank you very much for your time.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Brian. It was completely amazing. And I second your thought. Work is no longer a place, it's what employees do. And I'm looking forward to your Studio P15 for my private home environment. Thank you for joining us today. It was a pleasure to have you.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.